Miff live from New York, Peter Hallier, and it's an interesting date on the calendar today.
Absolutely.
In New York.
September 12 here, but September 11 over there, Miff.
That's right, and as I said earlier, you know, walking around the streets, I have to say I'm not downtown where the horrible site was. You don't really get a sense that there's much going on today. New Yorkers are going on with their businesses, as is to be expected, I guess, you know, so many years down the track. But we've got a gentleman in the studio who knows the area intimately, and basically he's a pretty amazing kind of guy. He's taken some photos from the actual site. He was the official New York Fire Brigade's photographer. His name is Gary Marlon Suson, and he actually just can't hear in his headphones right now as we speak. So we might have to just do some technical work.
No, you lead away, Miff. Maybe you can just have a chat to him if he can't hear us.
All right, Gary, not to worry. If he's got us now. Say hello to the boys.
Fantastic. Hi, Gary.
G'day,
Hello,
Gary.
boys. How are you?
Very good.
Greetings from New York City.
It's a big deal, you know, like crossing the oceans in New York City. I mean, this is a technical achievement, this show. It's like the moon landing this morning.
It is pretty amazing. It beats an 18-hour flight, that's for sure.
That's
Now,
right.
Gary, were you down at the site today, down near where the Twin Towers stood?
Normally I go down there, but this year I chose to stay at the Ground Zero Museum Workshop, which is a museum that I opened 3 years ago in the Meatpacking District. And I decided to spend time with the many guests that were coming and to talk to them and just, you know, be present for them.
Yep, and your photos were extraordinary at the time. How long did you spend at the site after the event, taking photos and working with the firemen?
Well, I was appointed official photographer 3 months after the tragedy. I was brought in to be the official photographer to document all the private moments of Ground Zero. So I was there full time for 6 months.
Yep. And what was that like, that experience? It must have been horrific.
It was a double-edged sword. It was horrific in that I had to see and witness, you know, things that most people aren't prepared to see, human remains and so forth. I wasn't just a photographer, I was a recovery worker. I dug for remains. But it was rewarding in the fact that I made a lot of very special friends, and I learned what brotherhood was about. I spent a lot of time with New York City firefighters digging, and their kindness and compassion for me and what I was doing was really an experience I'll never forget.
So, Gary, where were you, you know, this is, I guess, the famous question, where were you when it happened?
I was in my photography studio on West 14th Street, and I had arrived there early morning to set up for a photo shoot. I'm originally an actor and a playwright, but I used to shoot photography to make money on the side.
Yep.
And I was setting up for an early morning photo shoot, and I fell asleep on the couch, and then I awoke to a kick on my door, and it was my neighbor Daryl kicking the door saying, "Get up to the roof, the World Trade Center has been attacked." I thought he was joking. He kicked harder. I opened the door, and he said, "Grab your camera and get up to the roof." And we were very close to the Trade Center, so I ran up there and turned the corner, and I was horrified to see black smoke spewing from these beautiful towers.
So,
And what did you do then? What happened with you? Did you go down there and start taking photos straight away, or did you just sort of kind of run and hide pretty much?
No, I was on my roof watching it all unfold, and the towers collapsed. And about 30 minutes after, I ran down there with my camera to take photographs. I was able to get into the site, but I didn't really shoot much. I wound up helping out what was called the Bucket Brigade. I don't know if you know what that was. That was where hundreds of men and women were lined up with buckets, each passing buckets of debris down the line to try and get to what victims we could find.
Wow, that's incredible. Did you have any I guess things that you weren't allowed to take photographs of while you were down there?
Well, I mean, when I was appointed official photographer by Rudy Sanfilippo of the Uniformed Firefighters Association, he did lay down some very strict rules for me. He didn't really need to lay down the rules. I wouldn't have shot body parts if you had paid me, but he did say, please never shoot human remains, and of course, I never did. Seeing them was enough. If human remains needed to be photographed, then that was done by the coroner's office.
Yeah. Did you have any counselling after that?
About 7 years worth.
Yeah, they offered it to you, and
Yeah, they did, but I didn't have counseling. I had a little bit of counseling after the recovery ended. It was for post-traumatic stress disorder, and then I blew it off because I thought I was above it all. And for the next 2 years, I didn't socialize, and I stayed indoors, and I realized after 2 years, you know, gosh, I'm pretty messed up, and I'm depressed. So I got into a really great PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder program, and I'm happy to say that I've improved greatly.
And on this day, 7 years ago,
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center.
That's incredible.
In an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
Oh, the next building is another one.
Terrorism against our nation will not stand.
and live in the studio from New York City, we have Gary Marlon Suson, who was the official photographer for the firefighters at September 11. Thanks for staying with us, Gary.
My pleasure.
And Gary's just shown me the book that he's put together. It's called Requiem Images of Ground Zero, and there's some pretty amazing pictures in here. You weren't allowed to take any photos of a lot of the body parts and that kind of thing, but you've got personal items like shoes and teddy bears and people's glasses and that kind of thing. It's deeply haunting, but the one page that really sticks out is this one from the Bible. And do you want to explain this picture? It's quite incredible.
Sure. I was milling around the rubble, and I happened upon these papers, but they were on the other side of a cement wall, and there was a drop-off there. So I practically had to beg the fire chief to let me go photograph the papers. He said yes, and I went around, and I photographed the top paper, and it was pretty boring, to look at. So I peeled it back, and below it were just like 2 or 3 wet, burned pages from the Bible. The Bible itself was gone. So I was pretty blown away by that, and I leaned over and I took a photograph. But before I could pick it up and see what was in the text, my friend Mike Balone, he's a recovery worker, he called me, he screamed at me, Gary, come on over, we found the body of a firefighter. And I said, well, I'll be right there. And he said, no, now take the picture and let's go. So I took the picture, and I basically went with him. Later that night, I got the film sheets back, and I really fell off my chair because when I zoomed in, the passage that was from on that page was Genesis 11, the Tower of Babylon. So the 11 and the tower just blew me away. And so we all ran back that night to try and find the page. We had a little search team, but we had a rare rainstorm in Ground Zero, and so it washed it away. But I found that very powerful, very symbolic, and I found it during a time where I had made the decision to quit Ground Zero. I had seen enough in 6 weeks to last a lifetime, and I made the decision no more. And then there I found that Bible page, and I found the 11 in the tower a little too coincidental, so I stayed.
Gary, it's a day that's obviously remembered right around the world. It was nighttime here in Australia when it happened, about 11:30 at night from memory. But what does this day mean to New Yorkers now? Is the day getting bigger as each year goes on, or are New Yorkers getting on with their lives more and more?
Well, on surface level, you would be inclined to say that New Yorkers are moving on with their lives and they've forgotten, but I don't believe that. I think it's a deep personal scar for everyone who lived here or was in New York City at the time, and I think that New Yorkers have just learned to try and coexist with the pain that comes along with such a tragic event. From time to time, we do get New Yorkers into the museum, and they are like an open wound. So I think, like anyone who has suffered through a terrible tragedy, you do your best to suppress it so you can kind of move on with your life, but that doesn't mean that you've forgotten.
Do you think people live in fear that it's something like this will happen again?
I don't think New Yorkers think like that any more than the Brits do, or anyone who has suffered terrorism. The thing that annoys me is when you see on television certain cable news networks that shall remain unnamed on your broadcast, they always have this fear level, this elevated terror alert red, terror alert orange, and I really I don't like that because it tends to keep people in a state of fear.
Yes,
I think we get Fox News too, Gary, and we see a lot of that over here. And now I understand that yesterday maybe a memorial was opened by the president. Is there any sort of, I guess, annoyance that it's taken so long for a official memorial to be opened?
Yeah, absolutely.
In commemoration of September 11?
Absolutely. I can't speak for all New Yorkers, obviously, but myself and almost everyone I've spoken to, and even people who visit New York, are generally disgusted that there's so much feet dragging, that it's taken so long to build. This is arguably not the greatest city in the world, but arguably one of the greatest cities in the world.
It's pretty great.
And we're a cutting-edge city, in many ways, artistically and culturally, and I just don't understand why it's 7 years later and there's no museum down there and there's no new tower. how long does it take to build a building, a skyscraper these days? At the most 2 years. So,
Yeah.
But there was a lot of bickering that went on between the architects and the city and the owner of it, and nobody could see eye to eye. And now here we are in 2008, and there's still nothing.
What do you feel when you go down to Ground Zero? Because I know I've been there, and look, to me it feels like and maybe it's just because you know what's going on there. It feels like such a dark place. Do you get that?
Well, I come from a different background than you. Obviously, I worked down there for many months,
Yeah.
and it's like a sore spot for me, not just for myself, but I worked with a lot of New York City firemen, retired firemen known as the Band of Dads, and I watched them dig endlessly for their missing sons. They each lost a son, and many of them walked away empty-handed. And I remember in those last 15, 20 days that they realized that they weren't going to get their son back. And it's I just have tough memories down there.
Gary
So
Marlon,
it's I don't enjoy going down there.
You can see Gary's photos at groundzeromuseumworkshop.aol.com. Gary Marlon, Suson, thanks for your time
that's
this
not
morning.
it.
That's not it.
Oh,
That's
sorry,
not the
that's not
address.
the
Have you
one.
got an alternative
my
address?
apologies, Gary.
No, it's groundzeromuseum.com.
Oh, my apologies. Great, okay.
That's okay.
Groundzeromuseum.com, you can see Gary's photos. Hey, Gary, thanks so much for your time this morning on September 11.
Thank you, and thank you to all the people in Australia who are incredibly supportive of this tragedy that hit us. We do appreciate it.
Thanks, Gary.